Former contender Kelvin Gastelum will get another chance to turn his career around when he fights against up-and-coming French fighter Nassourdine Imavov. The two are scheduled to headline the first Las Vegas fight night of 2023 after their first bout was canceled due to travel restrictions. Let's take a look at where both fighters stand in their careers and how they'd match up against one another. First off, Kelvin's record since his title fight. Kelvin has been a contender in the middleweight division for years now, but his recent string of losses is the worst Gastelum has ever seen in his entire career. The veteran found so much of his success with his inherent toughness, his timing, and the consistency with which he can land the 1-2 or the 3-2 combo, even though his opponents are waiting for it. If his recent fights are anything to go by, it seems like the sport has evolved beyond Gastelum's current skill set. His performance peaked during the end of his first title run against Adesanya, but then the fighter never gained enough momentum to put himself back into the title conversation. We also noticed that while Kelvin has gotten better stylistically as he's gotten older, his approach to fighting can be a bit one-sided for the level at which the new generations of MMA are operating. The gap isn't that great though. Gastelum's recent losses are not representative of his fighting acumen. All his recent losses have been against the highest-ranked middleweights in the UFC. Robert Whittaker was the next man Adesanya beat after Kelvin, but the fighter almost reinvented his striking to evolve alongside the division. Gastelum might have to take the same route in January if he wants to get back to his winning ways. Coming up, just how good is Imavov? Despite being a top 10 fighter in the middleweight division and also being on a 3-fight win streak, Nassourdine hasn't stirred as much interest as he deserves yet. The Russian sniper comes out of Salon de Provence with a solid 12-3 record. At 27 years old, winning 4 out of your first 5 UFC usually gets people talking, but people will notice if Imavov pulls out a win over former interim title contender Kelvin Gastelum in January. Imavov, Dagestani-born, has that calculated and technical yet overwhelming tenacity that Russian-born stars like Khabib Nurmagomedov, Petr Yan, and Khamzat Chimaev bring into the octagon. What distinguishes him, however, is the accuracy in his striking that earned him the nickname Russian Sniper. Even on the ground, he finds the target, like when he elbowed Edmund Shabazian into oblivion while he was incapacitated by the crucifix. One of the reasons fans might not be super aware of Imavov is the lack of flash finishes or walk-off KOs. And while those can be pretty fun, those alone can't bring long-term success in the UFC. Imavov's well-rounded game is much more likely to succeed than an inconsistent knockout artist. Case in point, Imavov's previous opponent, Joaquin Buckley, won Knockout of the Year in 2020 but got dominated by the lesser experienced younger fighter. Moving on, how would a fight between the two go? If we had to pick a winner between Imavov and Kelvin, we'd probably put our money on the Russian sniper. His momentum coming into the fight is pretty good, and there's not a ton of his fight footage laying around for Kelvin to study. If we were asked to pick a fighter to win this bout from the top of our heads, it had to be Imavov. Despite the mountains of experience that Gastelum brings into the octagon, there's a question of motivation and hunger for the older fighter. Beating Imavov gets him back into the win column, sure, but it doesn't equate to the name value added to Nassourdine if he can finish Gastelum. Kelvin may have one heck of a chin on him, but he's shown you can knock him down if your strikes are accurate enough. Even if Imavov can't knock him out cold, he has all the tools he needs to keep the American at long range, neutralize Gastelum's improved wrestling with his own Dagestani freestyle experience, and just outstrike Gastelum, who's much more of a counterpuncher waiting for his prey to make a mistake. Hard to imagine that happening with Imavov though. He's a longtime trainer partner of the most technical heavyweight ever, Ciryl Gane. Additionally, what could victory mean for each fighter? It's always interesting when we see a fighter fallen from grace take on a young lion like Imavov. It represents a crossroads, a fight that might permanently change the trajectories of both their careers. The two were scheduled to fight once before at UFC 273 back in April, but traveling restrictions because of his visa meant Imavov couldn't travel to the US. For Gastelum, we feel this is his last chance at middleweight to come back into the winning column. If he loses this fight, it becomes his 6th loss in the past 7 fights in the division, with the only victory being a decision win against Ian Heinisch. If Gastelum can't fight the top contenders like Whittaker and Cannonier and won't be able to become an effective gatekeeper for rising talent, then there's no use keeping him around. He'll either be cut soon after or be made to change weight classes. Imavov, on the other hand, has it all to win. This is by far the biggest fight of his career, and a finish over the exceptionally durable Gastelum will confirm Imavov as a young-blooded title contender in a division where Adesanya has pretty much lapped the top 5. If he can win another couple of high-profile high-profile fights after beating Kelvin, he'll be on a 6-win streak, either fighting for the title or being 1.5 on a #1 contenders match. Finally, another Russian killer fights before Imavov. Gastelum v Imavov headlines the UFC Fight Night in late January, going for 5 rounds of 5 minutes each, while the remaining 4 fights would only be 3 rounds. A standout performer from the lineup is Shavkat Rakhmonov, 16-0-0, an unbeaten fighter from Kazakhstan who is another Sambo fighter. The unbeaten Sambo sensation has been storming through his division. His first 4 wins came in the UFC, all of them being finished in the first half of the fight, and the welterweight is looking to add his name into the mix at the top of 170. Given that Jeff is ranked higher than Shavkat, a victory over him could Shavkat replace him, or even precede him if Shavkat can pull another special finish out of the bag. Now, in other news, first off, UFC veteran Alexei Oleinik was cut from the promotion. We all knew this day was coming, but we didn't think we'd live long enough to see the boa constrictor leave the UFC. With a staggering record of 60-17-1, Oleinik was removed from the UFC roster following a pretty terrible stint of 4 losses in 5 fights. And even though his contract had ended back in April, he chose to fight once more according to his previous agreement. It was a pretty illustrious career, and Oleinik made a reputation for himself submitting fighters from exceptionally unexpected positions. His grappling in the heavyweight division has been outstanding and has submitted top fighters like Mark Hunt, Mirko Krokop, Travis Brown, and the wizard himself, Fabricio Werdum. We aren't fully sure what Alexei will do at this point. He said that the UFC offered him a new contract, but gave no details on the matter. Alexei could go to a rival MMA organization or even revert to a wrestling career. However, if Alexei decided to hang up his gloves once and for all, the 75-plus fights he's given us have earned him a nice, long retirement. Next up, Jon Jones' comeback has been further delayed. Looks like we're going to be waiting a bit longer to see Jon Bone Jones fight inside the octagon again. The former light heavyweight champion had vacated his belt after beating Reyes via a razor-thin decision victory in 2020, but hadn't fought since then. He's been bulking up to move to the heavyweight division, and his HW debut could be against several high-profile names. Jon could fight the champ directly. No one's going to complain about that, but he was first set to take on the most successful heavyweight champion of all time, Stipe Miocic. They were heavily rumored to fight on December 10th, but now that the UFC has booked Prochaska v Teixeira 2, it's certain we won't see Bones in the octagon that month. Finally, the real reason Mark Zuckerberg has been at UFC events. Even though we know Zuckerberg trains MMA multiple times a week and is a fan of the sport, we were all taken aback when Dana White arranged a completely private event for Mark and his wife, emptying the stadium for everyone but them and the staff. Last week, the UFC got into a partnership with Mark's Meta company and began talking about virtual reality for fans around the world who cannot attend live events, while also making the UFC Fight Pass a much more lucrative and popular system. To work the system, users will have to download Meta's Horizon Worlds app and MetaQuest Headset 2, which they can try out at LFA 144. The event would be the first under the new deal, giving a 180-degree view through VR 180. Do you think Kelvin Gastelum can make a comeback against Imavov next year? Or do you think he should either change weight classes or organizations if he loses? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget, if you like this video and want more of the same, like and subscribe.